Do you have something to say? Are there people who want or need to hear from you? Have you always wanted to start a podcast but don't know where to start? Welcome to Resonate Media, where our mission is to amplify you. At Resonate Media, we focus on helping underrepresented voices and aspiring podcasters get started by providing equipment, expertise, and experience to help you launch a podcast. To get started, visit ResonateMediaPro.com. Don't let the confusion, complications, and costs of hosting, recording, editing, and distribution hold you back. The world needs to hear what you have to say. Resonate Media can help your voice be heard.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to All Things Episcopal, where we talk about anything and everything related to the Episcopal Church. This podcast was designed with younger folks in mind and as a space to learn more about the Christian faith with the Episcopal lens. So in traditionally Episcopalian greeting fashion, the Lord be with you.
Hey friends, welcome back to All Things Episcopal. Today we are bringing you a bonus episode. This is the first time we're doing this type of episode out of a regular season, but we thought that this particular topic of policy was really important to address. And it's going to be jam-packed with a lot of good stuff, and hopefully it will be enriching and insightful and enlightening to all of the folks that are in conversation today, as well as to the listeners. So today, like I said, we're talking about policy, specifically the policies and stances of the Episcopal Church, and more specifically, the policies within the Diocese of West Missouri surrounding women's reproductive health, gun safety, and gun reform. And while we have addressed this in previous episodes, the inclusion of members of the LGBTQIA community, not just as members of the church, but in all ordained orders of ministry in the church. With that being said, while we are speaking about policies that are made known publicly by the Episcopal Church, the thoughts and the opinions of the speakers of this podcast, to include co-hosts and guests, are that of the individual and not on behalf of the entire Episcopal Church. These topics are some of the most debated in the church, but also much of society in the context of the United States of America. Please know that we have tried our very best to have a meaningful and rich conversation. It will not be perfect, but at the heart of it, we seek to practice civil discourse and remember our baptismal covenant, to seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving our neighbor as ourselves. At the time of the release of this podcast episode here in the Diocese of West Missouri, we will be observing Pride Month, as well as Wear Orange Weekend, which we'll talk about a bit further in this episode. Links to the policies and community organizations that the Diocese of West Missouri supports will be provided in the show notes. On to the show. We are in conversation today with Tara Bennett and the Reverend Robin Rasconi, who serves as a deacon in the Diocese of West Missouri. Tara and Deacon Robin serve on the Peace and Justice Committee of the Diocese of West Missouri. And of course, my co-host, Father David Kendrick, will be joining us in conversation. Hello to you all.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Tara and Robin, if you would, tell us a little bit about your story and how you came to the Episcopal Church and what inspired your work in the areas of peace and justice. And I'll let you all decide who wants to go first.
Tara, I'll defer to you.
Great. Hi, I'm Tara Bennett. I am a cradle Episcopalian, so I came to the Episcopal Church because my parents and grandparents did. My work with peace and justice was inspired by my daughter being scared after the Parkland shooting. I'd always been politically active, but she was scared that she was going to be shot in her school and became active within Kansas City, leading some student walkouts, vigils, and advocation for policy reform. And I decided to get involved as well. After the Uvalde shooting, the bishop asked me to help form the Peace and Justice Committee for the Diocese of West Missouri.
I'm Robin Rasconi, and I'm a deacon in the Diocese of West Missouri, and I came to the Episcopal Church when my husband and I started talking about getting married. Both of us were born and part of the Roman Catholic Church, and did not feel comfortable raising children in that environment. And so we came to the Episcopal Church because it was something that appealed to both of us. And I became involved in peace and justice activities in the early 90s. I was politically active before that, but more active starting in the early 90s, and joined the Peace and Justice Committee when the reproductive rights lawsuit was filed in the state of Missouri in early 2023, I believe. And that became a part of the Peace and Justice Committee's activities.
Thank you both. So as we said before, much of this conversation will focus on 3 areas: women's reproductive health, gun safety and reform, and inclusion of the LGBTQIA community. But before we begin, I think it's important for our listeners to know how policies are developed, decided on, and ultimately voted on in order to become policy within the church. And I'm actually going to defer to Father David to talk a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Claire. So you might have been hearing about, I don't know how much on this podcast, if you've been listening to us, how much you've heard about General Convention. What in the world is that? Well, General Convention is the main decision-making body of the Episcopal Church. It was created when the Episcopal Church was formally begun around the year 1789. General Convention meets every 3 years. It turns out this year it is meeting in Louisville, Kentucky. It tends to rotate around the country. So General Convention meets every 3 years. And sometimes folks say it was modeled on the Congress. Technically, it was really modeled more on the British Parliament. So, the British Parliament has a House of Commons and a House of Lords. So the Episcopal Church has 2 houses. There is a House of Deputies, and the House of Deputies is made up of laypersons, priests, and deacons. And then there is the House of Bishops. Now, in a sense, like Congress, no resolution, nothing can pass General Convention unless it's approved by both houses. So when I say that General Convention is the main decision-making body of the church, the kinds of decisions it makes, first of all, it sets the budget, the triennial budget of the National Church Headquarters, which is located at 815 2nd Avenue. Sometimes in the Episcopal Church, if you know enough after a while, you might just say 815, and people will know what you mean. So it's at 815 2nd Avenue in New York City, just a couple of blocks from the United Nations. I found this out with our family a few years ago when our son was working in New York City, and we went to the UN, and we were making our way back to a subway station. I passed a street, and I suddenly saw the Episcopal flag flying from a building. I thought, this is it. This is the mothership. So it's the budget for the national church that General Convention sets. It's also important to know that General Convention approves any revisions or changes to the Book of Common Prayer and any other church-wide liturgical resources. And then more specifically for the purpose of this episode, General Convention approves resolutions that are intended to express the official position of the Episcopal Church on the most pressing issues of justice and peace. And, we, at one point, I know we've had a podcast on baptism, and you might remember that we have this thing called the baptismal covenant. And one of those vows that all baptized Episcopalians make is to, and I'm quoting, strive for justice and peace among all people. So here we are talking about justice and peace, and we have representatives of our diocesan Peace and Justice Committee. So that's General Convention in a nutshell.
Thank you for that quick rundown on what General Convention is and how policies are made and decided on. I want to first touch on gun safety and gun reform. So in the Episcopal Church, we've had a long history of seeking to respect the constitutional rights of an individual while also being deeply concerned with the community welfare, particularly as it pertains to the children and youth of our communities. The first resolution on gun safety and reform that came to the floor at General Convention was actually all the way back in the 70s, 1976, at the 65th General Convention. However, I want to start a bit more recent with our resolutions, starting with resolution number C005, which was established in 2015, also known as Resolution Implement Laws to Decrease Gun Violence. If you would, Tara, tell us a little bit more about this particular resolution and its impact on the Episcopal Church and broader community as you are able.
The 2015 gun violence and gun safety resolution really was a catch-all for good gun policy that has been advocated by groups across the spectrum, from Brady and Giffords and Sandy Hook Promise. It calls for people to have permits for concealed carry. It calls for universal background checks, including at gun shows. It calls for a ban on military-style assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. It calls for a ban for the import and manufacture of full automatic conversion kits. It calls for the tightening of laws on gun trafficking and straw purchases. It requires people who possess guns to have gun safety training, and it advocates for more funding for research about gun violence, all of which are very important. And I'm glad to say that some of those things have actually been implemented since then. We still have a long way to go, but nationally, a good number of those policies, between the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act in 2022 and changing of the funding understanding for the CDC and the NIH to actually do some funding into research and guns as a public health problem. Those have all, we're making some progress, and I think the Episcopal Church's advocacy has helped.
Oftentimes, we don't see the intersection of public health and faith-based communities intersect. I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit more about how addressing gun violence as a matter of public health is also a matter of being faithful to our baptismal covenant. You touched on it a little bit earlier, but if you can expand.
Well, gun violence is a public health issue. Mm-hmm. The number of people who are killed, the families who are traumatized, the people who turn to guns because we have a proliferation of them and they're easy to access when they're in a mental health crisis, and those who don't see any other form of conflict resolution other than pulling out a gun. All of those things are adversely affecting our communities. It's the actual economic cost is huge. That those resources that could be put into better health care are instead being used to treat victims of gun violence, not just homicide, but suicide, keeping in mind that over half of the deaths by guns in our country and our state are due to suicide, not homicide.
Thank you. In the state of Missouri in particular, more specifically Kansas City, gun violence is a very concerning issue. Can you share a little bit more about the statistics about gun violence in Kansas City, and where the church is striving to stand in solidarity, not only with government officials, but also with nonprofits in the area and nationwide?
Absolutely. Thank you, Claire. Really, we are an outlier. Missouri has the 5th highest gun death rate in the country. So far this year, 53 people have died in homicides in Kansas City. Last year, Kansas City alone had 182 homicides, which was the highest on record ever in Kansas City. And since we are the Diocese of West Missouri, I have to note that Springfield also has a disproportionately high number of per capita gun deaths compared to other similar cities across the country. In the gun deaths in Kansas City, a firearm was used in 89% of the killings. We've had also this year, while our homicide rate has slowed, we've had an almost 40% increase in non-fatal shootings. Those are still families and lives that are upended by people being shot. In Missouri, as I said, 53% of gun deaths are suicide. So that looks at, we've had last year 733 gun suicides in our state. It's the 10th highest in the country.
Wow.
A suicide occurs every 12 hours in our state. And 63% of the people who try suicide use a gun. Our rates of gun suicide and homicide from 2013 to 2022 in Missouri have increased at almost double the rate of nationwide. This is why it's important. We don't live like other areas. I've lived in 5 states and 2 additional foreign countries. I have to tell you, other people don't live like this. They don't live with the gun violence we do, which is why it's so important as a diocese that we work with organizations who look at the local level, because we can see that there's a difference in policy. We can talk about nationwide policy all we want, but really policy is made at the state level. And in our state, it's at the state level. It's very rarely, because of preemption, able to be made at the city level. So we work with organizations that are advocating for data-proven gun safety policies, like many of them that I just discussed that the National Convention has called for. Things like Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense. We have worked hand in hand with some of their calls to action, particularly when gun policies will affect us in the church. There are violence interrupter organizations throughout both the southern and northern part of our state that are doing the work in communities to stop the cycle of violence before it continues to escalate, like Aim for Peace or a few other great organizations within Kansas City.
Mm-hmm. Gun violence is a very personal experience for many. For myself, my youngest brother and my cousin were involved in the Episcopal High School shooting many years back, or several years back. I shouldn't say many, just several. And it can be devastating. I mean, there's no other way of saying it. Devastating, overwhelming grief. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways we can remember and find our onward for lives lost is by participating in community gatherings such as Wear Orange. Can you talk a little bit more about what Wear Orange is and how the church is supporting Wear Orange?
Well, Wear Orange is a nationwide movement. It is the first full weekend of June. And it is a remembrance. National Gun Violence Awareness Day will be this year on Friday, June 7th. It's a remembrance for the victims and survivors of gun violence. As you said, Claire, it's devastating for entire communities. And Wear Orange is not a political event. It is a remembrance event. And in the Diocese of West Missouri, all of our churches have been invited by our bishop to participate in Wear Orange, to encourage that Sunday all parishioners to wear orange vestments, light churches orange if possible, orange flowers. And we have a set of prayers to be implemented, prayers praying for all those affected by gun violence, all of the families, and for the families of the perpetrators and for the perpetrators themselves, because more than likely they've been a victim of violence themselves. Wear Orange was started after a young woman was shot after being the week previous in President Obama's inaugural parade. She went home to Chicago, was out on a playground, and was shot and killed. And her family decided to start a yearly remembrance, and it's blossomed into a full nationwide event. You will see civic buildings and proclamations up and down our state, throughout all of our cities, lighting orange and recognizing National Gun Violence Survivors Week, or National Gun Violence Survivors Day, and Wear Orange Weekend. We also have, which I hope you'll link in the show notes, a list of daily activities, things that can be done. The diocesan suggestion is to do them the week leading up to Wear Orange, but they can be done at any time. Things to learn about the scourge of gun violence and the toll that it's taking on our community, and how you can be part of the solution and turn your thoughts and prayers into action.
I love that there is a sense of remembering someone's life and the healing component of taking time to be in community, to share story, but also to say enough is enough, and to do the little bit of good that we can in the ways that we can. And one of the ways that I see the Diocese of West Missouri doing that work through the Peace and Justice Committee with the support of the bishop has been supporting the Be Smart program the last few years. Can you tell us a little bit more about what Be Smart is and what its mission and vision is to end gun violence and how folks can get involved?
Absolutely. Be Smart is a nationwide program that we are implementing in the Diocese of West Missouri. And I have to say also the Diocese of Missouri on the other side of our state is also following our lead. And we work very closely with them in many things with the Peace and Justice Committee. The Be Smart is a program about gun safety for kids. It is not a political program. It is not advocating for any of the gun policy issues that we've discussed already. It's just making people aware that guns are the leading cause of death of children and youth in our country and in our state. And by keeping guns out of the hands of children, it's an adult's responsibility to do that, then we can at least start lowering those deaths. In Kansas City, in the last, so far, we've had 7 children just within the city limits, ages 8 weeks to 17, who've been killed in gun homicides. There was one that was killed in an unintentional shooting where he found a gun in his mother's bedside table. These can be prevented if adults keep guns out of the hands of children, make sure that children don't go to homes where there are unsecured guns, and that we recognize the role of guns in suicide, particularly in our teen. So it's a full presentation. We can come to coffee hours, to adult forums, talk to Sunday school parents, just bring a table to a trunk or treat and pass out information. So we can either give a full 20-minute presentation with discussion or just be there and provide you resources within your parish to talk about gun storage, safe storage, and keeping guns out of the hands of our children.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but normally at diocesan convention, the Peace and Justice Committee has a table, and Be Smart is kind of a focal point for that. So if you're in the Diocese of West Missouri and you're curious and you want to meet Tara in person and Deacon Robin and want to know more, you can have conversation with them at diocesan convention.
Feel free at any time to contact me directly. My information is on the diocesan website, and we'd be happy to be in conversation with you both for Be Smart or to add you to our list to advocate for policy.
Fantastic. And we'll also link the Peace and Justice Committee page in the show notes as well. Switching topics, we're going to move towards talking about women's health and access to abortion services and birth control without restriction. And I'm actually going to let Father David lead the questions on this segment of the podcast. Father David.
Thanks. Hey, so first of all, just to set the ground, the Episcopal Church has been issuing General Convention. There are resolutions from General Convention that go actually all the way back to 1967, even before the Roe versus Wade decision. And if you look at all those, and there is actually an excellent summary of those resolutions, I think will be in the show notes that the Episcopal Church has. And in many respects, I think the Episcopal Church really has tried to take a balanced view that really does respect all viewpoints on this issue. For instance, one General Convention resolution states, all human life is sacred, hence it is sacred from its inception until death. The Church takes seriously its obligation to help form the consciences of its members concerning this sacredness. Human life, therefore, should be initiated only advisedly and in full accord with this understanding of the power to conceive and give birth, which is bestowed by God. Okay? But at the same time, the next thing I'm about to quote here is from the very first resolution passed by General Convention on this issue in 1967, in which the Episcopal Church stated, and I'm now quoting, it's, quote, unequivocal opposition to any legislation on the part of the national or state governments which would abridge or deny the right of individuals to reach informed decisions about the termination of pregnancy and to act upon them. So I think that those are really the two. And when I look at all of the resolutions that General Convention has passed on resolution, those are the two statements that jump out the most at me. A clear understanding that abortion is a very serious matter for the human conscience, while at the same time saying the individual conscience of the woman has to take priority in terms of what decision is made. Now, we know, of course, that is not now the case in many parts of the country, because we know, for instance, we're in the Diocese of West Missouri. So the Missouri had passed a law a few years ago that basically banned abortion. And I think it's in cases, except in the cases of a medical emergency where a delay would create a serious risk of substantial or irreversible physical impairment of a major bodily function. And that law also had a provision that basically said it would take effect the moment that Roe versus Wade was overturned. And so it took effect on the day of the Dobbs decision in 2022. So there are other things that could go on, but let me turn it over to Tara and Robin and ask you guys, how is the Diocese of West Missouri responding now? In what ways are we still can we support reproductive rights in this legal climate?
The first thing that the bishop did was she, immediately after the Dobbs decision, she issued a letter, basically, Father, citing pretty much what you just cited from the General Convention, and just letting people know the position of the Episcopal Church, just so that there was clarity, so that throughout the diocese people knew what, just where the church was, because I think that that's something that people don't know. Just because, frankly, up until Dobbs, there wasn't a reason for people to really have a lot of discussion about it.
Right.
And then we have, because she is sensitive to the fact that there are pretty high emotions, we have taken a pretty low stance on it, but she is encouraging individual action on this topic and a lot of education. And so a lot of members of the committee have been active in the pursuit of getting signatures with the initiative movement. And so we have been educating people so that they knew that there was an initiative petition out there, getting signatures for that initiative movement, which recently, so in the beginning of May, there were signatures set up or turned in for the initiative to get reproductive rights on the ballot in Missouri. And so now what we will be doing is trying very hard to educate people about what that initiative that is going to be that will hopefully be on the ballot, what that includes. So we'll be doing some educational pieces for that.
So just to let people know what this means, there was a group that collected enough signatures. Now we have a Secretary of State whose views are very clear, and unfortunately, there may be other attempts to try to keep this off the ballot. But hopefully, there will be on the ballot a measure that would amend the Missouri Constitution to provide for the right for reproductive freedom, which is defined as, and I'm quoting, the right to make and carry out decisions about all matters relating to reproductive health care, including but not limited to prenatal care, childbirth, postpartum care, birth control, abortion care, miscarriage care, and respectful birthing conditions. The amendment would further provide that the state legislature could enact laws that regulate abortion after fetal viability. So that would be the big change. Only after fetal viability, which is defined in the initiative as in the good faith judgment of a treating healthcare professional and based on the particular facts of the case, there is a significant likelihood of the fetus's sustained survival outside the uterus without the application of extraordinary medical measures.
Right.
So basically, hopefully that will be on the November ballot. And so are members of the Peace and Justice Committee working on that? Then I guess you said, Robin?
Yes, we will. We are waiting now. We will know hopefully by basically this should be figured out by the end of July, beginning of August. That's when the local authorities should have determined if there's sufficient signatures that can be verified. And then we will start information campaigns to let people know that this is out there and what that means. Because there's going to, as you can anticipate, there's going to be two sides to all of this. And basically we want people to understand the full amount of what this is, because it's not just abortion. Because a lot of this, and you read it in those words, this is the full gamut of reproductive care.
True.
This is the right to be able to have access to birth control.
Mm-hmm.
This is the right to be able to have access to all sorts of reproductive tools, and reproductive ability. And there are, if you look at what the Louisiana legislature just did, they just made certain types of what we would consider basic reproductive care a band or a higher level of medical care.
A controlled, they
made it a controlled substance.
A controlled substance, like an illegal drug.
Yeah. And so we need to be able to protect women's health care. And that's what this is about. And so that's what we want to be able to educate people about, that this is a bigger, broader women's reproductive health care, not just abortion.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And that's the message we have to get out, because this is a bigger issue than that.
Absolutely. Is there anything else that folks out there ought to know about what the Peace and Justice Committee for the Diocese of West Missouri is doing for reproductive rights? That's a lot. I just wanted to make sure there's anything I hadn't mentioned that you could bring it up.
Tara, do you want to? The only other thing I can think of is that we're following a lawsuit, but the lawsuit pretty much is not. The lawsuit, I think, is going to remain dormant until the initiative runs its course. There was a lawsuit filed in January of 2023, and actually Bishop Dion out of the Diocese of Missouri is a plaintiff in it, challenging pretty much all of the abortion laws in Missouri, and specifically the trigger ban that went into effect, on the basis of that it violates their freedom of religion, because the basis for the legislative record and specifically on the trigger ban is egregious from the perspective of just how religious some of the testimony was. And so, but there are now, the last I heard, there were 14 different plaintiffs from 7 different denominations that were challenging it. And they were supposed to be a decision by the judge this January. And there has been absolutely no movement on the lawsuit what people believe is happening is, since the initiative language got cleared up and started moving, that the judge is just sitting on it. There's been no actual statement to that effect, but speaking as a former attorney, there is always a preference in the judiciary to have matters like this decided by vote as opposed to by the judiciary. So the common opinion is that he's just going to let it hopefully be settled by the voters as opposed to by him.
Got it. Well, thank you.
Tara, do you have anything you want to add?
I think you covered it very well. When the Peace and Justice Committee was formed, the bishop specifically said she wanted to address gun violence and reproductive rights. And those are the major issues we've discussed today.
Great. So switching gears one more time, going to our LGBTQIA plus siblings and their struggles. And if those of you who are faithful listeners of this podcast, forgive me if I'm repeating some of what was already said with Father David Wilcox, but just to set the ground here, because of the U.S. Supreme Court's Obergefell decision in 2015, same-sex marriage is legal in all 50 states. In that same year, General Convention authorized same-sex marriage liturgies as what were called a trial use. But so clergy can use those liturgies for same-sex marriage, but the prayer book has not yet been revised in order to remove gender-specific language in its marriage service. Now, General Convention has also barred discrimination within the Episcopal Church in any hiring or decisions about ordination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said of the state of Missouri. In fact, the law was recently just enacted this year, I believe, that bars physicians and other healthcare providers from providing gender transition procedures to any minor. And I've seen some reports that because of some of the restrictions they have put on insurance coverage, that even adults are having troubles accessing gender transition care. So, and of course, I say this with today is May 28th. Pride Month begins in just a few days. So, first of all, how is the Diocese of West Missouri participating in Pride Month?
Well, we have a number of activities that we participate in. I want to first say that this will be our 3rd year that, as a diocese, that we are showing up and showing out at Pride. In the past, we've had individual churches that have been there, but we are coming together as an entire diocese, and this is our 2nd year. In the Kansas City Pride Fest, that we are a sponsor. And so we are not just as a vendor, but we are tabling as a sponsor in the sponsor tent. So we will be at Pride Fest in both Springfield and in Kansas City. And so Pride Fest for Kansas City is Friday night, Saturday, all day Saturday and Sunday. We will in both Kansas City and Springfield, we will have a Pride Mass that starts at 9:30. And then for both, we will have Pride parades, and we will be marching in those Pride parades. Proud and a very vocal group. So,
and I'll add Springfield. Let me go ahead and we so I think it was in 2016 that my parish, St. John's, was the first to be a sponsor of our local Pride Fest, which back then was on Father's Day weekend. It used to be Springfield's Pride Fest was between Kansas City's and St. Louis's. Yeah. And so St. John's, we have been sponsoring Pride Fest since 2016. 2022 was the first year that we had the other Springfield Episcopal churches join in, along with some other Episcopal churches, and we did that again last year. And then this is the first year that the diocese is officially sponsoring the Pride Fest in Springfield. And this year, just so we know, Springfield and Kansas City are taking place on the same day. Mm-hmm. Actually, at one point, there was a period there where Springfield tried to have theirs in October because they decided they did not want to interfere with Juneteenth celebrations that were taking place in Springfield, always around Father's Day weekend. Yeah. And so for a while they tried in October, and then realized people really wanted to do it in June. Right. So in 2022 we went back to doing it in June, and now we do it the same day as Kansas City's. I'm proud to say our bishop will be in Springfield for Springfield Fest. So, on top of that, I mean, what is it? Given the climate, particularly for transgender persons now, where they're just being scapegoated, what can we do in terms of peace and justice for those folks?
I think we need to speak out as often. Speaking as a parent of LGBTQ plus children, we need to be as vocal as humanly possible, and we need to tell their stories.
Amen.
I have seen a transformation in an LGBTQ plus child that is unbelievable as I watch her become who she really is. Mm-hmm. And I am unbelievably grateful that she has been able to get the treatment that she has gotten. And so far, we have not had trouble with insurance, and we have not had trouble with anything. But I am anticipating all sorts of challenges, changing ID and changing, all of that. And I've had to make plans for where she might go live, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I just read this morning that the Attorney General in the state of Missouri is investigating, social workers at Washington U because of different stuff. And, I'm sorry, fortunately, my child is getting treated in Kansas, and I can't say enough good things about the staff that have treated her at KU, and that they have been a blessing for her. And I feel so awful for whatever is happening to the staff in St. Louis, because I can only imagine that they have been a blessing for a lot of people in that area, just like the people who have treated mine. And now there are countless youth and others that are not getting that care. And that is abhorrent to me. And it is not what God wants, in my mind, for our trans brothers and sisters.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? That was a reminder to me that, here in Springfield, we're surrounded by Missouri, whereas you've got Missouri, and then
Kansas. And we have an outlet.
Yeah.
At least right now for adults.
Mm.
Because we can't cross the state line. Yeah, I mean, I guess it really was brought home to me. I was listening to NPR, and there was this woman who was talking about her trans sibling, and she was telling the same story about her sibling that I feel about my child. That she saw this child, that she saw her sibling bloom when they became themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just so much the same story I feel for my daughter. And there are all of these people now in Missouri who either have to leave to be who they are.
Yeah.
Or cannot be who they are.
Hmm.
And that is not what God would want for them. I mean, they're forced to live in a way that is not truly who they are. I mean, I had no sense of that with my child. They were just very quiet. And Tara can tell you that they barely talked. And Claire can too. They were just like super silent. And now you cannot shut this child up. And
praise God.
But they're happy, and they are coming out of their shell, and they suddenly care what they wear, and it's like a whole new human. And it's beautiful.
Yeah.
But I would never have seen that coming had they not had the courage and the trust in us to say, this is who I think I really am.
Yeah.
And then you trust in that, and you follow with faith that they know who they are. And then you do that, and you see this beautiful person come out. And now, it's just helping them, discover all this person who's just been hidden there for so long.
Well, I'm glad to hear. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, it's a story people need to hear to actually know that transgender persons are real people, with, and
real feelings.
Real feelings. That's right. And I almost hate to ask it. Go ahead. You go ahead.
No, I said, and potential. I mean, we're missing out because we are not experiencing them as their true selves.
Right. So that does it for issues. I do want to ask one more question, and I have to admit I'm a little uncomfortable asking it, but I kind of feel like I'm in my 17th year of ordained ministry. I've been an Episcopalian for 40 years. I've been around, and so the question of General Convention and the decision and the resolutions that they pass on issues of justice and peace, I'm certainly aware, and I suspect you all are too, there are significant numbers of our fellow Episcopalians who perceive General Convention's resolutions on peace and justice to be partisan. And so I kind of feel like, just because I know there are people even people I serve, who have these opinions, I feel like I need to at least throw it out there and ask, you all whether, and feel free to jump in, all three of you. I assume you've heard at least some of these opinions, and how do you respond to the question of partisanship or the argument that the Episcopal Church is being too partisan?
We're living out our baptismal covenant. We are following what Jesus taught. Jesus taught us to take care of the least, to protect children, and to love everyone. There's nothing partisan, as presiding Bishop Curry would say, about if it's not about love, it's not about Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're called upon to do. That policy swings from party to party. There are some of the policies that we were discussing today with regards to guns that were originally supported by one party and then swung to another. Policy can change, parties can change, but protecting and loving everyone is universal.
Mm-hmm.
Well said. Well said.
Thank you.
My 2 cents is, if our listeners don't know this, my spouse and I, we typically vote differently. And one of the things that the Episcopal Church has done for us is a reminder of the importance of civil discourse. And the undercurrent of that importance of civil discourse is the baptismal covenant, to seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving your neighbor as yourself, to honor the dignity and humanity of all persons. So when you have a disagreement with someone over policy or a resolution, you have to remember that that individual is your sibling in Christ. That is where you have to remember to be your teammate, not just like in marriage, but as friendships. Because we've seen more and more and more people are disassociating from long-term friendships because of political stances that an individual or individuals hate. So remembering, to Tara's point, to love your neighbor as themselves. And I've often heard from some mentors of mine, specifically in the context of addressing the topic of LGBTQIA inclusion and sometimes the challenges that go with that, to love your neighbor as they wish to be loved, not necessarily how you wish to be loved, but how they wish to be loved, so that their dignity and humanity can be honored to the best of our ability. That's
Amen.
my 2 cents.
Good. So
I'm good.
Thanks.
What Tara said.
Just copy paste what Tara said. Well, thank you both so very much. Thank you, Father David. And this is such a meaningful conversation. We will post all the things concerning resolutions, ways to get involved, information about Wear Orange, Pride Month, all the things that you can possibly want in the show notes. And we wish you all well. The Lord be with you all.
And also with you.
Yeah. And thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Hey friends, thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. To learn more about all things Episcopal, visit campusministry.diowestmo.org/all things Episcopal. All Things Episcopal podcast is a production of the Diocese of West Missouri in association with Resonant Media. The Lord be with you all.
Looking for fresh ideas to lead your church in today's changing world? Check out the Future Christian podcast. Each episode features pastors, authors, and faith leaders sharing practical wisdom on ministry, technology, and tackling challenges like pastoral burnout. Whether you're a pastor, church leader, or passionate about your faith, we're here to inspire and equip you for impactful ministry. Listen now on your favorite podcast platform.